Please come in. And so this is where I would like to begin by explaining this title. So we start with the word Vedic. And I want to get across to you that when I use this word, I do not mean it in either a sectarian or historical sense. I know that in academic institutions and universities where history of religion or world philosophy is taught, then very often this word Vedic will be used in that way to signify some specific sectarian religious understanding or period of history, Vedic period of Indian history, etc., etc. I'm not questioning the validity of that usage, but actually, when we use this word, we go right to the, I could say, the Sanskrit root meaning, Veda. Now I have to be careful, because usually when I'm in North America or Western Europe, all the languages there are the Indo-Germanic it's called, or Indo-European, but I think Finnish is a little bit of an exception. I noticed when I came in here on the doors, Veda, pull the door open. Everywhere else, you know, if I'm in Germany, I can say there's a cognate relationship between Veda and your word Wissen, and you know. But anyway, even you're all English speakers, and in your Finnish language, you have many loan words. Like you use the word video, which comes from Latin. So vid, to see, from video is related to Veda, which means to know or knowledge. And even the word idea, from Greek, idea, id, is related to this. So Veda in its linguistic essence simply means knowledge. But a particular exalted knowledge, or we could say transcendental knowledge. And even I have to mention this word Vedanta, because this is really where we're oriented. The word Vedanta, which I think many of you probably have heard that word somewhere. Vedanta, Veda plus Anta. Anta is similar. We have the English word end, the finish or the conclusion. So the conclusive knowledge of Veda, the final summation, the point of it all. That's what Vedanta means. And then we come to education, from the Latin word educare. And educare actually means to remove covering, to uncover. So this is the idea that Vedic education is an exalted or transcendental knowledge which is meant to uncover the ideal person within. Not simply to, cover the person more and more with misconceptions, but to uncover a truth that is already there, that has been hidden by misconceptions. And of course, in the Vedic literatures, the Sanskrit texts from which we derive this knowledge, there is the explanation of, to use a very fancy Greek word, metempsychosis, or reincarnation. I mentioned the Greek word because reincarnation is also at the root of Western ideas. Socrates, Plato, and other Greek and also Roman philosophers accepted this idea. So there's this idea that there's an eternal soul which is moving from body to body to body, life after life. And in these different transitions, the soul is collecting misconceptions of what it is, because we identify with the body, we think that we're matter. So Vedic education is intended actually to remove those misconceptions and reveal the eternal self. So this is just my short introduction to what I mean when I say Vedic education, so that we can communicate. And I want to relate what I just explained to you to some terms that I've run across. I don't claim to be an expert in things that are taught in schools and universities in the West, but I have read into it naturally because I have to speak to such audiences, so I have to know there has to be some, bridging of ideas. So I've come across these terms, which are used somewhat in opposition. Character education, I wouldn't say as opposed to, but at least distinct from informational education. So character education is similar to what I explained here. And a type of education that is intended to bring forth better character in a person. And that is considered to be the success of the educational process. If that person comes out as a better, improved person. Whereas informational education is, just giving facts and figures and dates and, things to store away in the mind and write out on examinations and pass the test and get the degree. But there's not much concern of what kind of person is being produced by such a system of education. So we're oriented to this character education. And as soon as we accept character education, that such a thing can be at least, that such a thing has a role to play, has value, then immediately we have to consider something I alluded to before, transcendental knowledge, or a transcendent philosophy, or an idealism that takes us beyond the here and now, the so-called material facts of the world. As soon, and I'm saying this is quid pro quo, you cannot avoid it. As soon as you start to talk about this, then this other we have to consider. And I want to cite for you a Canadian moral philosopher. He's written books in ethics. His name is Kyle Nielsen. And I looked at a book he wrote a few years ago. And this Mr. Nielsen, Professor Nielsen, I think he's at Vancouver somewhere. Anyway, he's a self-professed atheist. He makes no bounds about it. I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. But at the same time, in this book I read it from him, he said, because I'm a moral philosopher, my field is ethics, therefore I have to admit, and this is the term he used, I'm also a dreamer of the absolute. You see? At the same time, I'm saying I'm an atheist, but his argument, I think, is very compelling. He said, because ethics is about the way people should be, not about the way they are. The way they are, that's materialism. That's, here and now, facts of the world as it stands. That's that. But that's not ethics. Ethics is the way people should be or could be, the way they ought to be, the way they should strive to be. So this is, he said, this is aiming at something higher than what we have now. And he's an atheist. So this is something to think about. So this is what I'm saying, that as soon as we consider character education, then we do have to consider ideals that go beyond the way things are now. So the way I want to just mention also some quotations from a couple thinkers of recent times who are commenting on the way things are now in the field of knowledge, in the field of education. There's a British philosopher of the earlier part of our last century, the 20th century. His name is Alfred North Whitehead. And he in one of his books gave a very, I think, a nice explanation of the materialistic conclusion of much of what we might call the scientific or technological approach to knowledge. He said the conclusion is that it's a view of the world in which the only thing that is happening is, he has this very nice phrase, the hurrying of matter. You see, this is how the world is described. It's just matter hurrying from one place to another place. And this is what you're left with, you see. And obviously he's saying this leaves much to be desired. And then more recently, of course, I want to mention this because I think there's a kind of conceit that I've noticed. People think because our modern science and technology has now got more into computers, digital information, that somehow, because of that, we're moving away from the gross, 19th century classical materialism, industrial materialism. We're coming into something more refined, more intellectual. But I was just reminded this when we drove in. I noticed just nearby we have a place, the Technopolis. Am I right? It's some technological village or something like that. So I was just reminded of a book that I had read a few years ago by a man named, he's a journalist, but in the field of science and ideas of today. His name is Neil Postman. And he wrote a book called Technopoly. So when I saw Technopolis, I remembered this book, Technopoly. And it was interesting because I told you what Whitehead said about the hurrying of matter. So he was summarizing, and I don't even know if there's a conscious reference to Whitehead, but he was summarizing today's education and the conception of knowledge itself. He summarized it as a hurrying of information. You see, that in other words, all that has happened is that matter is being represented as information in forms of ones and zeros, the digital numeral system. And that information is busily being bounced off satellites and sent here and there. But as Neil Postman and Whitehead, both of them the thing that they were pointing out is that no one knows why. And Postman said, no one even knows how to ask why this is going on. What does it all mean? Why are we so busy sending information back and forth? What is the point of it? So this question, you see, this is often the dividing line between what we might call the materialistic outview and something more idealistic. Is this question why? Those who lean more to the materialistic side, it seems, I hope I'm not being too facile about this, but anyway, I'm citing what I've read myself from different sources. It seems those who are more inclined to a materialistic direction, they're more concerned with the question of how to do things. Whereas those who lean towards idealism are concerned with the question why. For example, science deals with how to make an atom bomb. You see, but scientists are famous for saying, we don't have anything to do with the why question, you see. Why use an atom bomb? That's not our field. We just make atom bombs. Or whatever. So many of the features of today's technological so-called progress. There's a great wealth of how things can be done, but when it comes to the why, then there's a lot of, confusion, a lot of doubt, a lot of unanswered questions. So I'm bringing you back to the point of, Vedic education and character education. It is definitely more looking at the why question rather than how. Although that's not to say that this type of education leaves one impoverished in terms of information or the practical ways of dealing with life. But when we look at that classical Vedic culture, we see that although it embraced everything we have today, more or less, there was, of course, not just philosophy or religion, but there was medicine, there was political science, there was science of even warfare, called in Sanskrit Dhanurved, and everything was there. All the needs of humanity were covered. But there's a limit put on it. There is a different understanding of what is progress. You see, progress is spiritual. Progress is towards realization of what I really am, who I really am, rather than just progress in doing things faster, more efficiently, and accumulating more and more and more, either material goods or information or whatever. So this would be the difference, you see, a sense of the direction of progress. So now I want to cut to the chase. That was all by way of an introduction. And I want to just jump right to the heart of Vedic education. I understand from Tattva that previously, not with the students today obviously, but in 2001, my colleague and godbrother Dhanavir Maharaj was up here, and he spoke on the same subject, but he spoke more about the system of Vedic education, the guru-disciple relationship and such things. But I want to talk in this session about the purpose, about the whole point of it. What is defined as an educated person? How is an educated person supposed to appear, and how does he behave? So I'm going to cite for you some brief Sanskrit phrases which come from a sage of India from thousands of years back. His name was Chanakya Rishi. Now, he's very, very well known in India. In fact, the governmental quarter of Delhi, which is the capital city of India, where the Prime Minister lives and the main government offices are, that is called, just like we have Technopolis, so that's called Chanakapuri. There is talking about etymology, there's a relationship between a Sanskrit word puri and the Greek polis. It means the same, city. So Chanakapuri, the city or the town of Chanakya. So he is a great sage, especially his teachings on politics, diplomacy are very much valued even today in India. And I want to say, modern India is also not a very good example of Vedic culture, Vedic education. It has been largely westernized under 300 years of British colonial rule. But still, as all national groups are, they are proud of their heritage, so they still refer to Vedic knowledge quite a bit. And this is one example. So Chanakya Pandit, the sage Chanakya, he gave three in his aphorisms. He mentioned three particular qualities that would be there in a person who is educated in the Vedic sense. And the first one is in Sanskrit, matravat paradarishu. This phrase, matravat, matra, means the mother. Darishu, dara means woman. So it's interesting that the first consideration is how women are viewed. And this phrase means that every man should view women other than his own wife as mother. And then conversely, there's of course the way women should view men. Women should view every male other than their own husband as a son. Now, I'm sure that there are modern pretentious political ways of understanding things that someone can immediately come with an objection to this. This is assigning a biological role, but no, it doesn't actually mean that at all. It's not mother in a biological sense. In Vedic culture, mother is worshipable. Now, everyone has heard that in India they worship cows. Yes. They always talk about that. Why do they worship cows in there? Or why are cows considered respectable? This is something you should know, my dear Western students. If there's one thing, like I once had heard of a class on history in American University, where the man first day he came to the board and he just put this on the board, 1066. This is a date. This is the date Norman the Conqueror invaded England. And he said, if there's one thing I want you to remember from this whole semester, it's that date. That's his first, the first thing he said. So if there's one thing that I want you to remember, it's what I'm about to say right now, that the reason that cows are respected or honored or even worshipped in India is because they are one of what is considered 7 kinds of mothers. They're one of the mothers. Besides your own mother, there are 6 other definitions of mother. One of them is the cow because she gives milk, and not just to her calf, but to everyone. So actually this is a very, very key element of Vedic culture, that a mother is worshipable. A mother represents the goddess principle. Ma, in India today they address Shakti, or there are different names for there's a conception of God, and side by side his Shakti or energy or the goddess. And this is the complete understanding of God. It's a combination of male-female principle. And in our Hare Krishna movement, we observe the same. This is essential to our religion. When we say Hare Krishna, Krishna is referring to the male aspect and Hare the female aspect. So that's the complete understanding of God according to the Vedas. So mother represents the female divine principle and therefore is worshipable. So in other words, what this means, Matravat Paradarishu, is that women are to be respected. Women are not to be oppressed. Women are not to be treated as sex objects. Women are to be respected and very much appreciated. And so there is this is not simply also, it goes beyond simple morality or behavioral considerations. This conception of every woman as mother, and conversely every woman seeing every man as son, you can see what it does. It's suggesting loving emotions. Yeah? It's suggesting that in culture there should be an emotional life, a sense of loving, but which is appropriate. You see, and this is the very idea that if a man sees every woman other than his own wife as mother, then sexual relationships are going to be focused on the home and family and marital relationships, and not just freely manifest everywhere among everyone. Which some people say that that's good, but I think there's also a lot of evidence to show that that causes a lot of problems in society too. So this is one very, very important result that was expected from Vedic culture, is a very refined sort of relationship between male and female. And then the second thing that Chanaka mentions is Loshtravat Dravya, yes. So Dravya means let's see. Dravya para lushtrava, yes. Dravya parishu lushtrava, that's the phrase in Sanskrit. So this means, lushtrava means the property of other people. Now, translated, this phrase requires explanation. What it means is one will see the property of others as garbage in the street. Now that doesn't mean that one is, demeaning other people's possession as being simply garbage. But what it means is that if you see garbage in the street, I mean, a person with any self-respect doesn't go rummaging through the garbage. He doesn't think to touch it. It's something that you hardly even look at when you see it. What to speak, you'll bend over and start looking through it. So this is the attitude one will have to the property of others. That it's not even within consideration to think of touching it. What to speak of picking it up and going away with it. And I want to say that I've traveled quite a bit. And I visited many different countries and of many different cultures and talked to many people. And everywhere I go, whether it's in the Western world, Euro-American type of culture, or the Asian world, everywhere people tell me they're nostalgic about the good old days. People always say, there was a time here in our country, or in our place, our city, when you could leave your house unlocked at night. Or you could even go away from your house and leave it, not bother to lock it. Because people were so trustworthy. I've heard the same thing here in our country too. And, but people, it's like a sad lament that times have changed and we can't do that anymore. Even in the villages, even in rural places, people have to lock their door at night. So this rise of criminality and theft and violent crimes, this is an indication that something is lacking in the modern world in terms of character education. And then the last of the three items that Chanaka mentions, Atmavat means the self, Sarvabhuteshu. So what this means is that one feels in himself I think the best word is empathizes. He empathizes within himself other living beings around him. In other words, he feels their pains, he feels their happiness. This goes beyond the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but it's more like feel for others. This is the sense of this phrase. So this requires one to be, of course, compassionate, and this is Sarvabhuteshu. This in Sanskrit means all living creatures. It doesn't just mean human beings. All living creatures one should have sympathy for, in the sense of sympathy. There are some instruments that have sympathetic strings, Indian instruments in particular, like the sitar. That means they're like a sitar, like a guitar, has strings that you play, but then there's strings underneath that just resonate when you play the strings on top. And this is called sympathetic intonation. So like that, we should feel for others. And if one has this empathy for other creatures, then one will naturally, from an emotional core of the being, not want to do harm to others. It goes beyond simply morality, that you should not do hurt to others, but you would not do because you would feel the pain that other creature would feel should you do it harm. And this last point I want to give a little more stress to than I gave the other points, although they're all important, because I think it's been recognized that it's a very disturbing trend as we look at generation after generation. I mean, now we can talk of, you see, I had my generation, I'm from the 60s, so we had our time. It was a great time. But now, we've passed on to become the old generation. It's real poetic justice there. And so we've become concerned about the younger generations coming up and what they're like. So reading into this about what is said about the succession of generations, it's been noted that there's a disturbing trend that each new generation seems to be more blank. In fact, there's a term, the blank generation. They seem to be more blank in their feelings and just tuned out, much more self-centered. And I brought this book with me because I want to read a passage. It's by a Canadian psychiatrist actually, named Dr. Robert D. Hare. He's one of the world authorities in psychopathology. His book, which I highly recommend, is called Without Conscience. And it's a very deep look into a mental and emotional disorder which Dr. Hare thinks is on the increase. At least it's becoming more and more and more visible. Whether or not there's actually more and more psychopaths among us, maybe that can't be said. But it's becoming more and more prominent. And what is very disturbing is that it's becoming more and more cool. In the slang sense of the term. It's being portrayed in films. The psychopathic nature is more and more being presented to us as kind of heroic. And young people too, they're adopting a lot of the characteristics in their youth culture, so to speak. There's a lot of characteristics of psychopathology. So he's quite concerned about that. So, and this psychopathology especially focuses on feeling for others, because a psychopath is typically a person who has, as Dr. Hare says, he paints by numbers. He has no idea what emotions really are, except emotions like anger or hatred or lust, something, these very base emotions. But finer emotions, sympathy, compassion, sharing joy with another person, he has no idea, really, by experience what that is. But he just picks up from others that there should be an appropriate, you should say things appropriately and react inappropriately. So he learns how to do that, so he can pass through society. People will think he's a normal person. But actually, given the right circumstances, because psychopaths are very opportunistic, they can behave in very outrageous ways, and no one can understand why. And the reason is because they have no empathy for other people. Other people to them are just something to be manipulated. And they have no remorse. This is the meaning of the book, without conscience. They don't feel bad about it. So I just want to read a paragraph from this book, which is, of course, related to education. He says, if, as I believe, our society is moving in the direction of permitting, reinforcing, and in some instances actually valuing some of the traits listed in the psychopathy checklist, traits such as impulsivity, irresponsibility, lack of remorse, and so on, our schools may be evolving into microcosms of a camouflage society where true psychopaths can hide out, pursuing their destructive, self-gratifying ways and endangering the general student population. Troubling indeed are the implications of silence of those 20 Canadian youths who knew of a murder, knew the identity of the murderer, but, whatever their reasons, told no one. They suggest that our society may be not only fascinated, but increasingly tolerant of the psychopathic personality. Even more frightening is the possibility that cool but vicious psychopaths will become twisted role models for children raised in dysfunctional families or disintegrating communities where little value is placed on honesty, fair play, and concern for the welfare of others. So this is this concern for the welfare of others. Atmavat sarvabhuteshu. This is actually what that means, and that's very key here. And as to his remarks about how psychopathic behavior is becoming cool and a kind of twisted role model, I might mention that when I was a boy, I was born in 1950, so when I was about 8 years old, there was all over the news reports of a teenage couple. I think the boy was 19 and the girl was 16. The boy's name was Charles Starkweather and the girl's name was Carol Ann Fugate. And they were from some Midwestern town, I've forgotten. Some small town, very average place. But they had a relationship and they went on a murder spree. And they killed quite a number of people in a very unfeeling manner. And when they were later caught, the way they were talking about it was just so matter of fact. It was very chilling. And so this was all in the news. And you know, these two at that time in 1958, they were considered like mutants from hell or something. No one could understand how they could do such things. They murdered close to a dozen people, and they you know, it was just like swatting flies or something. They didn't care. Even the girl herself, she was killing members of her own family, her own sister and brother, younger sister and brother, helping her boyfriend kill them. And then they were sitting for a few days in the house, you know, eating, watching TV with these dead bodies of her family laying around. And she, you know, later she just like, well, what's the problem? You know, like it just didn't enter her mind that there was anything, you know, really, really wrong with that. What was wrong is only that they got caught. So in 1958, this was like a, you know, a horror film come to life in the media. It was really something, you know, shocking and new. But I want to mention that that case since then has become the theme of at least 3 major Hollywood films. Starting in the 1970s, one was made. And the most recent one, based on this Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate case, was a film made by Oliver Stone called Natural Born Killers. And in these films you see the couple, the murdering couple is they're the heroes of the film, you see. And you know, it's like heroine. You know? Previously it would have been I don't know, Romeo and Juliet or something would have been the theme of a film, but now it's 2 serial killers. So this is not an exaggeration what he's saying. I mean, Hollywood is making movies which, of course, at the end they may have some, you know, some standard ending where the 2 killers are themselves killed. That may happen, but throughout the film, they're the center, and they're somehow or other glorified. And obviously, people who watch such movies, young people, will be conditioned in some ways to emulate that sort of behavior. So that really is a real problem. What to speak of the music of today, the rap music. I don't listen to that, but I've read about it. I read about one rap song. The title was Murder, Murder, Murder. So people listen to this and think that it's really cool. So I think this is a very serious problem that educationalists are concerned with, but I'm not sure that they have the tools to actually deal with the problem. So this is one of the major purposes of our movement, the Hare Krishna movement, as a worldwide movement, is to provide source material from the Vedic texts which shed a light on traditional character education. And so this is really what we mean by Vedic education. And as I said, the purpose of my talk today is just to focus on that heart. And I wasn't intending in the first part of this program, my talk, to really get into any details. I'd rather leave that to you in the form of the questions that you might ask of me if you have any specific questions about how things are done or like that. I just wanted to speak on the core issue of what Vedic education is all about. So I think I'm going to just stop here with my talk and leave it to you to ask any questions that you might have. I find that often this is the more interesting part of the talk. Back and forth.
Can you talk a little bit about how you do it, or some of the...
Yes. Well, in our movement, we have schools, both for children, all the way through, children and adolescents, and also we have higher education. The person who spoke 2 years ago here, he is actually the rector of a school in the United States in Kansas City, which is a Vedic college, so that means higher education, and it's a recognized educational institution in the USA. So, but we have the schools for the young children and the high school age kids too, particularly in India. International schools there, one in Mayapur in Bengal, and the other in Vrindavan, which is in Uttar Pradesh, north central India. So these schools are called Gurukula, which means place of the Guru. So Guru, everyone's heard that word, it means a spiritual teacher. So this means that the education is geared to bringing forth spiritual qualities in the students. And so the students are, the lifestyle that they live in the school is very, we would use the word sattvic in Sanskrit. Sattvic means in the mode of goodness, or very pure. So the diet is like a yogic diet, a yogi diet, which doesn't mean that it's not healthy, but there's no meat, fish, or eggs, these type of foodstuffs which are considered to promote strong material desires. Rather, they're foods that come from 6 groups, which are all approved by the scriptures. Standard things like vegetables and fruits and grains and milk. And the students, they rise early for devotional services in the early morning. That is a key part of their daily program. And they learn devotional arts. They of course learn the Vedic scriptures, memorizing many, many Sanskrit slokas and the meanings and how to explain these texts. And they learn devotional instruments. The mridanga, it's a 2-headed drum, and harmonium and kartals, and they learn to chant devotional songs. And then they learn the more, what we might say, typical subjects, language and grammar and history and arithmetic and these sorts of things too. So our own movement then provides for those who are so educated. It provides positions or vocations or occupations for these students if they want, or if they want, they can, as they get older, shift over into the, I don't know if you want to use the word normal, normal educational system, the outside of our movement educational system. And they may get training as they like in some role in society at large. So, but we consider our success, coming back to the point of character education. Even if someone leaves at some point to pursue, again, what might be called a more normal educational path, we consider our success that we see that in all these persons who have gone through our schools, that they do take the character training with them. And even though they may become a little distant from our movement or our society, still they tend to maintain many of the principles. Of course, in our present time, I've said some critical things about trends in modern culture, but on the other side, there is also, we see in society more accepting of people who do follow pure principles of life. I think there's more of acceptance of vegetarianism nowadays, and there's more of a broader view of religious belief and philosophies of life. So that's a good trend, I have to say. And so students who have gone through that type of training that we offer, they're able, because this might be a question, how can they, do they have trouble fitting into society? But because of that more accepting, I think, of spirituality in people, they are able to. And in fact, they even get a certain respect from the people around them, that they are trained to follow such principles, because there are many people who would like to be. I think they would like to. They know that it's good, to observe these principles, and they would like to themselves. Maybe they feel they can't for whatever reason, but they at least respect it. So someone who does, they do respect more. Okay.
Can I ask another one?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm a little ignorant here, but how does the Hare Krishna movement fit into the Hindu tradition?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, I think I should say some words about the Hindu tradition or Hinduism, which is really, it's kind of a catch-all term. It doesn't really mean that much, because its origin is, it's a Persian or Arabic, I don't know, mispronunciation of the name of a river. The Sindh, we say Indus River, but in India it's called the Sindhu River. It's now in present-day Pakistan. So that was the main river that was separating India in olden times from the Middle East, from Afghanistan and Persia and more westward. The first major river in that border area. So about 1,000 years after Christ, armies from the Middle East, which had become a Muslim world by that time, so they began to cross over into the western border regions of India, and reaching that river, in their way of pronouncing it, they called it the Hindu River instead of Sindhu River. And they called the land beyond Hindustan, and the people they called the Hindus. So this word Hindu is applied actually to a amalgam of religions. It's not one religion that you can point to in Hinduism. It's although they all trace their theological and liturgical origins to the Vedas. That's true. There's a common source, but it's many-branched. And it's sort of like, to try to help people in the West understand, Christianity can be, it can be said to be part of a Semitic family of religions, including Judaism. They often say Judeo-Christian religion or culture, and also including Islam. The Muslim religion is all based on the same prophets and the same basic ideas as Judaism and Christianity. And all of them hold the Jordan River to be sacred. So if you could imagine someone coming from totally, say, some Asian culture somewhere, coming to the West and asking you, what is your religion? And you reply, oh, I'm a Christian, I worship Jesus Christ. And they say, oh, you're a Jordanist. You see? We would think that's a very odd thing to say. But it's tantamount to calling a person who follows the indigenous religion of India a Hindu. It's the name of a river. It's not really in any, at least what we might call scientific way, applicable. Of course, the word has been used so much that even in India they use it too, and they call themselves Hindus. But it's a catch-all phrase. So in that religion that is native to India, that coming from the Vedas, there is an important branch, Vaishnavism, the worshippers of Vishnu. It is sometimes said that there are three main branches. There are the worshippers of Shiva, the worshippers of Durga or Ma, the goddess I told you about already. They're called Shaktas, and the worshippers of Vishnu. Vishnu is the name of God, which means literally means he who dwells everywhere. The idea is that God is pervading everything. And Vishnu is a person, and the Supreme Person, so even although he's one person, he has many, many aspects. And so one of the features of Vishnu is Krishna, whom we particularly worship. Krishna means all attractive. So those who worship Krishna are worshipping what they consider to be the most loving and attractive, and you can even use the word cute aspect of God. So so we're in the Vaishnava tradition, and in that tradition there are four main schools, or what are called sampradayas, schools of doctrine. So the Hare Krishna movement is connected to one of these schools, the Brahma Sampradaya. And particularly it's the Brahma Sampradaya in Bengal, in eastern India, because there's a Brahma Sampradaya in southern India, in Karnataka, and another major branch in eastern India, and that's the branch of Chaitanya, the saint, or we consider him actually an incarnation of God, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who began the Hare Krishna movement. As you see it, Hare Krishnas are known for going out on the street and chanting and dancing, singing the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So that was all introduced by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about 500 years ago. So in India, I spend quite a lot of time in India, and the Hare Krishna movement, or ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is actually very well respected in India. And it's not considered, maybe when my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, he first went to the West to preach and then came back with Western disciples. This is a not an unusual thing in India, that Vivekananda did it and other gurus do it. They go to the West because in India it's like, there's this phrase, selling coal to Newcastle. It's like Indians have a tendency, oh yes, I know Krishna, you know, you have nothing to tell me about that. So then they go to the West and get some Western disciples, and that's unusual. And then the Indians will listen, oh, this is something special. So my spiritual master kind of did the same thing. And so initially, in the late 60s, early 70s, when he came back with a few American disciples, then they might have thought that this was something, you know, a little exotic and foreign, but since that time, in India, the vast majority of members, and I mean, it's in the range of now thousands and thousands in major areas, major cities, who are specifically, they're not just generally devotees of Krishna, that's in the millions and millions of people all over India, but specifically oriented to ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement. So now the Hare Krishna movement is not seen in India to be something foreign or exotic. It's accepted as an Indian religious movement, and one that is very pure. In fact, I remember recently, not long ago, I saw on the internet, I just happened to bump into some conference, some, what do you call a bulletin board on the internet. Some Indian people were just exchanging messages back and forth, and one of them happened to mention that, yes, I'm here, and he mentioned some city somewhere in America or Canada, I forgot which city, and he said, there's a Hare Krishna temple in our city, and I'd like to go there. And then someone was saying, oh, so what's that like? He said, well, it's a very, very pure form of Hinduism. So this was like a non-solicited comment from a person who is not a member of the Hare Krishna movement, but an Indian. And so I think this tends to show you how they see ISKCON today as Hinduism, but a very, very pure form of it. Any other question or comment? Yes?
I would like to ask about your own training. I mean, if you are talking about guru training, teacher education, you know, or teacher training, how does it happen?
Well, if you're asking me, myself, I joined this movement in late 1970 in Boston, Massachusetts, USA, and joined what we call a temple. There is still a temple in Boston, and I entered as a brahmachari. Brahmachari means student, but obviously I was 20 years old at the time, so I was an adult student, and so I think it's quite a bit like, yes, it is quite a bit like the old idea of a monastic school, like they used to have, much more common in Europe too. A boy enters a school where he could be trained to be a monk or a priest, or at some point he may go back to secular life, but he gets that training, both religious and also more normal type of education, but that education is also oriented, you know, for the use of the religion itself. So that's how I've learned. Of course, I guess from the Western point of view, my education in ISKCON has been quite exotic, because I learned. I don't want to say I'm a master of the Sanskrit language, but I do know Sanskrit well enough to speak about it and explain it, and texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Purana and others. And then the what we might call the ritual aspects that are involved in worship. And then my interest has always been speaking to the public. I started this when I had hardly been a member a year, and I was already being asked to go sometimes to schools or to yoga schools also, and present our point of view of things. to others, and I've always really liked this. That was always something I just had a taste for. So then along those lines, I've done a lot of my own reading, and kind of become self-educated on a lot of subjects just so that I could speak on them. So that's might be considered a bit unusual in the normal course of events in the Hare Krishna movement. It's not something that I would say the majority of our members are interested in doing, but I want to stress that we can do it if we have a good reason for it. And so I personally have a very big library of many books, not just Hare Krishna books. And I do try to keep abreast of what's going on in other fields of knowledge, and so just so that I can, comment on them when I need to. So, yeah, I don't know if this specifically answers what you were asking, but this is kind of like a general overview of my own education in this context.